Hey, we're looking at the next chapter in the Young Bucks book, Killing the Business. Um, Culture Shock in Japan by Matt. I said the last chapter by Nick um, was my favorite so far. This one is now my new favorite. And I have a feeling that's how it's going to go for a little while. One, I'm interested because now they're really in the thick of it. And two, Japan has a special place in my heart. I'm half Japanese. I've lived in Japan on more than one occasion. And my pro wrestling career found its way there on more than one occasion. Certainly not at the Young Bucks level. And the way that Matt describes sort of the feeling of they're going away for a tour. How many weeks is it? But it's pretty standard length of the tour, right? It's like 5 or 6 weeks. I would always do 6 week runs. That's pretty standard shit. And you know, their respective loves, Dana and Crystal, were definitely out of the mind of like, oh my god, this is forever. And they got to Japan, and just the way that they sort of described it. One, they went over there with merch, which I fucking love. They were really the first to do that. And so I love that they highlighted it. I mean, everybody always did glossies, but, you know, they were doing these shirts and all this kind of stuff. And for them, selling a shirt was a matter of being able to get dinner, because they were going to get $100 a match. They're going to wrestle just about every day, but they were putting up the ring, you know, all this kind of stuff. 11-hour flight. And it started off inauspiciously with the person from Dragon's Gate being late to pick them up, so they were scared about that. The way that Matt puts over just how scared they were, how unknown they were, how they clung to Pac, who was a young British wrestler at the time, and he was the other English speaker, and he kind of let them know the deal. Their debut is taking place at Kodokan Hall, and even their descriptions, even Matt's descriptions of what Kodokan Hall looks like, where it was on the certain floor, like the details that they put in this thing. They don't inundate you with them, but they really shape it for you. And these things that you may have heard about as a wrestling fan, now you have a better picture of. And then if you had no idea, or weren't a wrestling fan, or weren't a certain kind of wrestling fan that would know these things already, he introduces it to you effectively. I think Matt does a really good job of catering his writing to people that are already in the know, that people that are already in the know and want to know more, and then people that aren't in the know. He introduces all of this in a way. And he and Nick really do have this kind of style of writing that encourages you to continue to read. I love when they reveal the things that they figured out. Here on page 89, I didn't realize at the time that these guys wrestled almost daily and did a lot of the same spots and sequences every single night for years. Their confidence came from repetition. There's 3 huge lessons for wrestling people, and this is one of them. Repetition matters. Doing things in the same way matters. Then he very subtly tells you how many people are there, 2,000. So it's a big crowd, right? And then he figured out something else, the second big lesson from this chapter. That's when it clicked. Participation with the crowd got just as big of a reaction as many of our dangerous moves. And for some people, this is going to seem like common sense. But it's not common, because again, the tradition where they learned wrestling and the wrestling they were interested in did not encourage this. So this is something that they had to learn on the road. Even in Japan, which famously people go like, oh, their crowds don't really react to stuff. That's not true at all. It's just you have to learn how to work, right? And here's another lesson that's great. There's a real feeling of being part of a systematic team. He talked about the hard work of it all. They go to a town, set up the ring, do their match, break the ring down, rinse and repeat, right? But he said there was a real feeling of being part of a systematic team. We made friends quickly, and since most of the guys were obsessed with American culture, they took a liking to us. You got to learn to work your angles. I love the little details here, right? We were so strapped for cash, we gave ourselves 1,000 yen each per day, which equals to about $10 American. We'd either load up on McDonald's cheeseburgers or buy a loaf of bread, peanut butter, jelly, and bananas, and live off of sandwiches and fruit for a couple of days. On a rare day off, we'd visit the Dragon Gate Dojo, where they kept the wrestling ring along with crash pads. In the front of the dojo was a pet monkey chained to a tree we were told were the Dragon Gate mascot. So they get into all this stuff about the monkey and how the monkey was really aggressive and angry and they were scared of it. Eventually, it would come out sometime after we were done touring for Japan for Dragon's Gate that some of the wrestlers were terrorizing and torturing that poor monkey. And as a sign of shame, several of the wrestlers shaved their heads and publicly apologized for committing animal cruelty. It was terribly disappointing, especially in Japan, a country and a culture that prides itself on respectful behavior outside of the ring. Then they also talk about how they were going through the wrestling magazines published in Japan looking for their picture, because that's one of the signs that you know you've made it. And they saw a picture of a young fit guy with curly blonde hair. That's Kenny Omega on his first tour of Japan. So their first tour of Japan coincided with Kenny Omega's. Another one of these like meeting things that you know is going to be big later on. I talked about this in full disclosure. I'm going to talk about it here too. That one of the wrestlers, there was a big celebration at one of their shows because his wife had a healthy baby. And then Matt asked Nick, why is this guy here at a random small show instead of by his wife's side? But then I remembered, if you're a wrestler, you don't miss a show. It's just the culture of the business, the one I'd been conditioned to respect. I think this goes for everybody in wrestling who's doing it at any level that's decent. Shit show guys, I don't know. But everybody else, this certainly rings true, right? You only miss a show if you're hurt. And even then, most of the times you just work through it. I feel like this way of thinking needed to be changed one day. This really sparked my imagination and got me thinking, along with Jimmy Rave's thing of him having to leave because his arm got amputated, about how wrestling has gone through this seismic shift and we're in the middle of it. And I think Young Bucks are definitely on one side of it, of quality of life is as important or more important than the wrestling business. And this is going to take a whole lot to change most people's mentalities on this. But I think it's a move in the positive direction. I'm trying to wrap my mind around it. My instinct is to fight it. But I think I need to start embracing it and thinking about it more. This bit about how they still had a ton of merch, that they sold a lot of their glossies, but because the shirts were more expensive, about 2,000 yen, they weren't selling them. So this wrestler, Sema, gets a bunch of Japanese wrestlers to sign their shirts from his clique and then talks it up and they sell out. So the Bucks get to go home with money in their pocket. And he just writes simply, I'll never forget that. And you could tell they never forgot it. It's fucking awesome. Then they get back from the tour and Dana's there, who's Matt's soon-to-be wife, and they're like all about it. But Crystal doesn't show up for Nick. And so she realizes this is not for her. They talk briefly about how doing this Japan tour gave them street cred. And that's awesome. And then the second tour is where they started getting the push. It was this tag tournament. And they talk about having to adapt, how like the ring was broken and they noticed it. So they basically took the ring apart, put mats on the concrete floor and said, go for it. And they started getting wins and that kind of thing. Then Matt talks about how he was brought back as an extra for SmackDown and how they were both brought in as extras to impersonate DX. And they thought it went really, really well. And they thought they had impressed Vince McMahon and likely did, but that they didn't bring him back for 3 years. Which just goes to show my thing that I said in full disclosure, which I encourage you to listen to, especially the commentary portion of the mentality of the wrestling companies and promoters is to not care about the wrestlers as much as they expect loyalty from the wrestlers going towards them. And that's something else that I think needs to change. And it's going to come at a cost. I think it's going to come at a cost at not being able to do the kind of wrestling that people are familiar with. And I don't have all the answers. I just know things are shifting. And in many ways, they're shifting for the better. Then Matt talks about getting married. Malachi's there. Nick's there. Dustin is there. Their friend. Brandon. Cutler. Yeah. Dana's younger brother, Scott. And then right after that, Nick has to run off. He gives his best man speech, and then he's got to go because he's got a show, Pro Wrestling Guerrillas Battle of Los Angeles show. So I'll read the end here because, again, it's another great thing that drags us into the next chapter. We were both at a time in our careers where we couldn't afford to pass up an opportunity. Nick arrived at the building and settled in for the show when someone he recognized approached him and stuck out his hand. Hey, nice to meet you. I'm Kenny. So this is the true meeting with Kenny Omega. Super fucking cool chapter. I'm enjoying this so much. Again, I have a link down below. Get the Young Bucks book. Get it on digital if you're not an old person like me who needs to have a hard copy. Or get yourself a motherfucking hard copy. Will it be signed like mine is? I don't know. I'm super awesome. But yeah, I'm going to be back tomorrow, baby, with another chapter from this great book. What is another chapter? Let's give a little preview. It's called Sweaty Nights in Reseda by Nick. And I'm sure it's going to be about, at least the beginning of the chapter is going to be about their discussions and meeting and bonding with Kenny Omega, which is pretty pivotal to this whole fucking story, I would gather. Anyway, have a great day. It's time to put some videos up, and I'll talk to you later.